Hello, I'm Jim McCairns, and today is Friday, December 16th, 2011, and I am in the North Hollywood headquarters of the Television Academy, interviewing Piper Laurie for the Archive of American Television. We'd like to take a few minutes in the beginning to talk about some of your early information, your early years and influence. What was your name at birth?
Rosetta Jacobs.
And then when and why did you use the name Piper Laurie? How did that come up?
Well, from the time that I decided I wanted to be an actress, no one had ethnic sounding names. And they had Lana and Tyrone and easy names to remember. So it was always assumed that I would change my name, and I went for a time being called Rosetta Cobb, and for a time I was fond of the name Trudy, so I called myself Trudy Cobb, a 13-year-old.
What do people close to you call you?
Sissy.
And where did that name come from?
Because I was a sister, my sister's sister. And so it was Sissy or Sis.
When were you born?
January 22nd, 1932.
And where were you born and where did you grow up?
In Detroit, Michigan, on Tyler Street. Upstairs in the room in the back, I was delivered by a male midwife.
At home? At
home.
What was your father's name and what did he do?
My father's name was Alfred Jacobs, changed from the original Jakubowicz. My grandfather, when arriving from Poland, decided Jakubowicz was too long and difficult, so he changed it to Jacobs.
And your mother's name?
Charlotte Sadie Alprin.
And what did she do? Was she a housewife?
She was a housewife.
What traits do you think you inherited from each of your parents?
I got my father's skin, and I think I got my sense of humor from both of them. And my mother was kind of, I think, frustrated, wild woman with a fantastic sense of humor and no outlet for it.
Siblings? Do you have siblings?
Yes, I have an older sister. Had an older sister, and she died about 5 years ago.
And her name?
Sherry Arlene.
Now, why did your family move from Detroit to Los Angeles? That happened when you were around 6 years old?
No, actually, it was at the end of the Depression, and my sister had been very ill with asthma since she was an infant. And my parents were very concerned, and at one point they loaded my sister and me onto a bus. My mother came with us, and we went to Arizona to see if the climate would help my sister's asthma.
And did it?
It didn't. And it was interesting because we lived in the middle of the desert in a little shack. We had to walk miles to get to the bus or to the grocery store. My mother would hold on to us and say, "Hold on to me," because at night there was no light, and she'd carried a flashlight and the groceries in the other arm. Hold on to me. She thought we'd be lost in the sand.
Well, how did the transition to Los Angeles come about?
My mother heard that there was a sanitarium for children in the mountains in Tahunga, California. And they decided, rather than sending my sister alone, that I would go along to keep her company.
Were you aware of Hollywood or Los Angeles at the time?
No. Actually, one of my aunts said to me as we were packing, "Oh, Sissy, cheer up. You know, you're going to where the movie stars are." But I had no idea what that meant. I'd never seen a movie. My mother had taken us to the vaudeville shows at the Fox Theater and the Michigan Theater. And so I knew what stage shows were.
But not movies?
No.
What were your interests growing up?
Nature. And I loved drawing and painting. I had a little set of colored sand that I could sprinkle on glue and make pictures with that.
Were you an introspective child?
Yeah, I was almost mute. I spoke to my parents and my sister, and that was it. And that was very difficult to pull words out of myself. They call it now an anxiety disorder. Well, I feel perfectly fine right now.
But back then, they just thought you weren't speaking.
They just took it for granted that I was quiet and shy.
Did you have thoughts about what you wanted to be when you grew up?
Occasionally, when my mother would take us to the theater, I saw Jane Withers on the stage. She was a little girl then, too. And I thought it was remarkable that a child could get that kind of adoration and attention and the applause. And she was so energetic and funny, and I just thought that was fabulous. Actually, I went up onto the stage. They were giving away peanuts for any of the children who wanted to come up on stage. You could take as many as you could carry. And I was about 3, and I don't know why or how I got the courage to do it, but I found myself walking down the aisle up onto the stage. And I held up my skirt straight out, and my sister talked about it for years, just mortified by her little sister showing her underpants to the audience, who applauded and laughed.
And yet, that was not the girl that they knew who was quiet all the time.
No, I had no awareness of the audience. I just noticed the people on stage and the bright lights and their colorful costumes. It seemed like a nice place to be.
When you were, where did you attend high school out here in Los Angeles, or did you?
Yes, I went to Los Angeles High.
What was that experience like?
Do you want to go back a little?
Sure.
Because just so chronologically.
Of course.
My parents, after deciding to send us to the sanitarium, they left us there for 3 years, which changed my life. And it gave me a great gift of imagination, because I relied on myself. We had no entertainment. All the children there was no television. if we were very good children, we got to listen to the radio 15 minutes on Saturday mornings. And 3 years of that life with no touching, no hugging, creates a different kind of human being. And when I came out of that place and I was reunited with my parents, I took with me that great gift of imagination.
What kind of person was created out of those 3 years?
I don't know, but one that wanted to share her secrets, and there were many, and to create and to be brave and do something wonderful in the world.
And then when they moved out to Los Angeles and you were reunited,
yes,
then there was traditional schooling?
Yes. I went to Wilton Place Grammar School, and I went to Sunday school and Hebrew school.
Were you still a quiet child?
Yes, I was quiet little Rosetta. Except at certain points, because I was so quiet, my mother found out that there was an elocution class being given in a nearby converted church. And on Saturdays, I would go with my girlfriend she took a harp lesson, and I took an elocution lesson. And I learned 2 pieces to recite, a dramatic one and a comedy one. And it really changed my life, because in school, when we had an assignment to recite a poem or something that we had memorized, I thought, well, this is so lucky. I know something I've memorized. And so I did my comedy monologue. And the reaction of the children was just so fantastic. I'd never experienced anything like it. It was thrilling.
And that gave you confidence?
That really, yes, it did. It changed my life.
Did you find you wanted to do more along the lines of that to get that kind of reaction?
I wrote a play and cast the children in my class and directed it and put it on. And I was asked to play the lead in Hansel and Gretel. And I said, God help me. I said, no, I would rather direct.
And you were a teenager?
No, I was 11.
Well, that makes sense that you would rather direct.
Yeah.
What was your exposure then to acting by way of a profession then?
It just seemed an automatic thing that was going to be what I did. That's the only thing that I felt at ease and could do fairly well.
And you had become more familiar with movies from living out here?
Oh, no. I had seen a few movies, but and I actually won a contest, a talent contest, and the grand prize was a screen test at Warner Brothers, and everything was fine. I'd never seen a camera before. I'd never heard the phrase soundstage. I mean, children were quite naive in those days. You know, we didn't have the exposure that young people have now to the business. And I was just fine. They put me on a stool and spun me around in front of this monolithic camera. And then they stopped, held me still, facing the camera, and the director said, and now, Rosetta, I'd like to see what kind of personality you have. Tell us your name, darling. And with that, something horrible invaded my body, and my head went down to my chest. I couldn't pull it up. I couldn't speak. I couldn't make a sound. And I could not lift my head. And the movie star, Dennis Morgan, happened to be wandering around, came and saw what was going on, and he wanted to save me. And he came over to me, and I saw him out of the corner of my eye because I'd seen some movies by then. And he tried to cajole me into lifting my head. And I just couldn't. It was painful. And unfortunately, I had the same experience from time to time after that, even into my adult years.
How old were you when that first incident happened?
9.
And that stays with you?
Well, whatever was causing it stayed with me, yes.
Did you have designs on a future that involved anything other than acting as you were getting into grade school and high school?
I thought about being an architect or I loved the idea of archaeology, and I always collected rocks and minerals. And I loved to paint.
But at some point you said, I think I'd just rather be an actress. I think I'd like to pursue that part.
I don't think I made a clear-cut decision. I thought I could do everything.
But at some point?
At some point, my mother recognized that I had a flair for hiding behind characters and seeming to enjoy myself. And she pursued that and would found an agent for a time, and I would go on interviews, and I had some screen tests, and nothing that was particularly extraordinary.
How did you come to audition for Universal Studios? How old were you then?
I was 17. I'd been working with a group of actors, a really good acting group, the Schneiders, Benno and Tommy Schneider, came from the group theater, and originally from the Habima players in Russia. And I was very serious. That's why I still don't know how football works, because after school I would go to rehearsal of a scene for class. And I had an audition at Universal, and one of my classmates came with me who had directed me in a Tennessee Williams one-act play, This Property is Condemned. And our teacher said that I would be given 3 minutes for my audition and be prepared to be cut off after 3 minutes, but to start the play from the beginning, which I did. And part of my brain was listening for the thank you very much, but didn't come. And finally, we had gone through the whole play, and they were applauding and crying, and I thought, oh my goodness, they take me as a serious actress, and they decided to do their own screen test, which I did with Rock Hudson,
What was
who
that
became
like?
a very good friend, and we were both signed. And then we immediately I was put into a movie playing a kind of caricature of a teenager. I was just totally lost because I didn't have the technique to be able to handle unrealistic parts.
Well, first, how did you feel about signing the contract in the first place? That was a big deal, right?
Oh, it was a big deal, signing a contract. I felt so important. There were 15 copies, one right after the other. This is, such a grown-up thing to do. And I remember there was a judge that I was taken to supervise that. He was a semi-retired judge and a friend of a friend. Take a look at the contract and sort of say, okay, sign's okay.
Your mother took you to him?
No, it was a family friend.
Okay.
And the judge said, Rosetta, I'm going to tell you something that will be very important to you. Never, ever let men know that you're smart. And I thought about that through the years. And I thought, how evil of this man who thought he was doing something nice.
What are you supposed to say to that when you hear it? I mean, how are you supposed to
I thought,
respond?
okay, I'll do that. I'll be dumb.
Did you continue to study acting while you were under contract?
No, they kept me busy all the time. Immediately I went into my first movie, and then when I wasn't actually filming, they'd send me out onto the road to sell them. I tried going back to acting class, but they wouldn't let me. They wouldn't let me do any television. They wouldn't let me do anything except make these movies that I hated and embarrassed me.
Did they not let you because they kept you busy with projects, or they did not let you because they just wanted to keep you under their thumb?
No, they kept me busy with projects. As a matter of fact, within the first year, they tore up my contract 3 times to give me more money and extend the time. And I also, at the depth of my depression, finally realizing that I'd made a mistake signing such a long-term contract with a place that really didn't respect me. I had an offer to do a movie directed by, oh dear, a senior moment.
Well, we'll come to him.
Yeah.
And you weren't able to take that movie?
No, they refused. They refused to loan me to this extraordinary creative director. Yeah.
But you knew as an actress at the time that these projects were not good or not worthy of your talent, or both?
Well, I won't say worthy. I didn't know how valuable I was yet. All I knew is that I'd been working on really fine material in acting class. And these were projects that were silly, and I knew they were untruthful at the core.
Costume movies, romantic?
Yes. And I had dreamed when I was a child of wearing some of those great ball gowns. It should have been wonderful. Of course, the hours spent in wardrobe being fit 20 costumes, and all my energy went into all those superficial things.
And you knew at a fairly young age that that wasn't right for you.
Right, right.
Let's talk about some of your co-stars, if we can, from that period. Tony Curtis, you made 4 movies with him?
Yes, we made 4 movies together. And I met him in my acting class. He was already under contract to Universal. And he flirted with me and asked me to go to the movies with him a few times. And we were friends. And then when I was signed at Universal, they put us together.
You enjoyed working with him as well?
It was fun. It was fun. At least, having a friend there. The material was silly, although I can understand today why people, especially young people, were attracted to things like The Prince Was a Thief. They were cute and they were sweet.
But not as deep as you wanted to.
No.
As you wanted your movies to be. A lot of people don't know that your first movie was with Ronald Reagan. Talk about working with him.
I met him when I was still 17, and we started the movie when I was 18 because I asked the studio specifically not to start my contract until I was actually 18 and graduated from high school because I had finals to do and I didn't want to be distracted. But they made me leave my high school early, and I went to school on the lot with Mrs. Haney, the school teacher, and I were the only ones in the tiny little schoolhouse. And I'd study hard, and then at 11 o'clock in the morning we'd have recess, and we both go to her office in the back of the schoolhouse and smoke cigarettes.
That was your recess?
Yes. And in the afternoon, same thing. I had finals and the locked door, and we took it very seriously, and I did well. And then as soon as that was over, I started my first movie.
Now, forgive me, at this point, you're officially known as Piper Laurie?
Yes.
And where did that name come from anyway?
Well, a man who we met, my mother and Dad and I met on a vacation out in the desert, approached my mother and said he wanted to be my manager. And so he would come to dinner, and he wrote that name, Piper Laurie, on a piece of paper, handed it to me, little scrap of yellow paper. And I didn't know what it was. It wasn't capitalized. I thought it was a thing. I don't know what it was. But he said, that's your new name. And I never liked it. But I didn't have anything better.
And he didn't explain where a name like that would come from?
No, I never asked, I never asked anything of people. It was the least conversation I could get away with, better.
The better.
So.
Except when you're on screen, because you're more comfortable there.
Well, other people's words.
Right.
Yes.
You made one movie with Reagan, Ronald Reagan. What was that experience like?
No, just one movie.
Right.
He was thoroughly charming, as everybody was. Spring Byington, Charles Coburn, Edmund Gwenn, these fabulous actors who had such great bodies of work, and I wasn't aware of them until years later, and I would understand what a terrific experience I was having and not really appreciating it. But they were lovely to me, and they treated me like a beloved little sister, including Reagan, who decided he wanted to invite me to my first premiere. And the studio heard about it and decided that it should be chaperoned.
Oh.
So I was picked up and taken to the Brown Derby, where Ronnie was waiting for me. And then we were driven to the theater, and the publicity woman took me home.
That was your chaperone, the publicity woman?
Yes. Yes.
And then you came, well, we'll get to that when you worked with television, but you sort of kept in touch with him.
Yes. Our relationship became a bit closer than that later on.
How about Rory Calhoun? You worked with him?
Yes.
What was that like?
He was a handsome guy and lots of fun. We used to play catch on the set when we were bored. Nice fellow. And I see the pictures we made together nowadays, and I think they were better than I thought they were.
They were light, but they were more enjoyable?
Yes, yes.
And what do you think of yourself when you see them?
One of them I thought was not bad. I couldn't bear to see myself in those days.
But today you could actually see yourself, and you could see your skill, you could see your acting talent?
Every once in a while I do a moment that I believed.
Some of the other handsome leading men you worked with include Tyrone Power.
Yes, it's too perfect. Just a lovely gentleman, and and they still do that cast, the young entrepreneurs with older men, and that's quite accepted.
Rock Hudson was another?
Yes, well, Rock and I were buddies from the very beginning.
You met at class, you said?
No, we did our first screen test together, and waited out those weeks while we were waiting for the studio to make up their minds. And then the day that we found out that we were both signed, he and my friend Bob and another actor who under contract, Jimmy Best, all took me to my first we spent the day together, and I'd never been to a circus, and that's where they took me.
And Rock Hudson remained a friend and a co-star.
Yes, we made several movies together. Yeah.
He was both. It was a nice part of your life on and
yes,
off the screen.
Yes, there was a long period after he became very successful, and my life took another direction. I wasn't living in California anymore, and we were out of touch for many years. And I did see him about 2 years before he passed away.
And you talked?
Oh yeah, we were in a friend's home.
Did you talk about the old days and relive some of those memories of acting in the movies together?
No, no. I think he was ill already, and saying it was something other than what it was.
Yes. How would during this early period, how would you have described yourself as an actress at the time?
Superficial, struggling, not really being able to handle sophisticated roles, because words were still my enemy. It was, if somebody had written them, it made it a lot easier, but it was still hard for me to play somebody who talked a lot, who was articulate and at ease with words. And I see it when I see those old movies.
You see your reticence come across?
Yes. And every once in a while it's exactly right for the character, but it was accidental.
What would you tell, well, this is a very existential question, but what would you tell her if you could talk to her?
Hold on, Rosie.
What was it like to be an actress at the time, though? Were actresses held back a bit? What was how did you fit into the Hollywood scheme? And what was it like to be a working actress at the time?
I think I was at the wrong studio. There were other young actors that were given the opportunity to be in movies about real people. And I think that would have fit me much more than where I was, where it was play acting and mediocre material.
So some actresses were getting beefier parts at the time?
Well, not necessarily huge parts, but just real people.
You were being groomed as a Hollywood sex symbol as well. There was a big campaign.
Well, they couldn't make up their mind. They kept me well chaperoned. And one week there'd be a fan magazine story about my being one of the last 6 virgins in Hollywood.
They picked 6. There was only 6?
Yes, there were 6, yes.
But they're grooming you with these cheesecake photos and this marketing campaign. Not something you saw yourself. It's not a role you saw for yourself, was it?
No, and I was just deeply depressed and just sort of gave up. You know, I didn't know how to fight for myself. I didn't have the wherewithal to go into the front office and demand real parts in real stories.
How soon into your contract, you talk about this feeling of depression, how soon into your contract was that?
Oh, less than a year.
You knew?
Yes. Yes, it was so frustrating, and sometimes I would write out speeches for myself to say, and make an appointment to see the head of the studio. And I'd go in there and I'd forget my words and just revert to that 9-year-old child with my chin down to my chest and burst into tears and run out. Just.
And you weren't able to do anything other than that which Universal gave you? You couldn't do TV or anything?
No.
Now, at some point, you said, I'm fed up, and you got out of your contract. How many years into your contract was that?
It was almost 6.
And how did you finally get out of it?
I was going through a time in my life of a renaissance, of changing my life. I left home, finally. I was 23, and realized that I didn't know my own mind. I was supposed to marry somebody, and I really didn't want to, and I said, yes, no, and I kept changing my mind, and no, I'm going to have to grow up.
You're finding your voice.
Yes. And around that time, I was given a script to read, and I thought it was terrible. And I was just going downhill. It wasn't getting any better, and I said, I'm not going to do this. So I just calmly dropped it in the fireplace and called my agent and said, I'm never going to work again unless you get me out of this contract. And I meant it.
That was a huge leap.
Yes.
But you felt that strongly about it.
Yeah.
And what did he do, your agent?
It took him about a week, and he finally did it.
How do you come to do that?
Well, I'd certainly asked before, but there must have been something in my voice that he heard, and that he knew that I meant it. And that was a big step forward for me, being able to articulate that.
In breaking a contract, did you end up owing Universal
Yes,
something?
I had to do 3 movies for them for almost free, for a very small amount of money. I would have done them for free.
Just to get out of the contract?
Just to get out, yes.
And you felt better for having established yourself as somebody who's not going to take this anymore?
Yes, and my parents thought I was throwing away my career. My boyfriend thought the same thing, thought I was crazy. No one, and my agent, Abe Vogel, called. He said, Piper, rethink this. You're going to be making as much money as Joan Crawford did at the height of her career. And none of that meant anything to me.
Doesn't seem to be why you got into it.
No.
Now, if I could back up, you mentioned that the studios wouldn't allow you to do other work. Television was very big at the time.
Right.
What was their reasoning for not doing something that would get you and the network and the studio publicity, like television? What was their reasoning for saying no?
They wanted me to be making their movies, and they cost very little, and they made a lot of money.
You could do several in a year.
I did at least 3 every year, sometimes 4.
So as you're getting out of the contract, this was the 1950s. This was also a very unusual time in the real world with McCarthyism and the Hollywood blacklist. Were you aware of it at the time, as an actress and as a person?
No, that was another big step forward for me.
How so?
Learning about the rest of the world and starting to read newspapers. I had been blind about what was going on in the world. Only because I had a friend who became a notorious figure in that the Army McCarthy hearings. I had been dating David Shine for 3 years.
You didn't know, though.
And no, I didn't know anything about anything that he. I didn't know about communism. I didn't know, and what McCarthy and Roy Cohn were doing. I did meet Roy Cohn, and spent a number of evenings with he and David Shine. Roy would bring a pretty girl with him, and sometimes he'd come alone. And but they never talked politics. They never talked about communism. One night there was before we went to dinner at the Ambassador Hotel, we were in Roy Cohn's suite where he stayed, and he was talking to somebody. He said, "You want to say hello to Joe?" And I said, "Who's Joe?" Well, and I got on the phone. It was Joe McCarthy, who was saying, "Well, hello there, Piper. You know, how are you having a good time with my friends?" And I just had no patience with small talk, and so I gave the phone to Roy Cohn very quickly. And
but things started adding up in your head?
I didn't know anything about what they were doing. I didn't know about the blacklist. God help me, I didn't. I didn't know how many lives were being ruined and how many suicides there were and how unfair and the terrible price so many people were paying for this man's mind.
How did you come to be more aware of it?
When my friend David got into trouble, someone called and said, "Read the paper." So I read a paper, and I found out that Roy Cohn had wanted David to be serving on this committee. And he was being drafted, and Roy Cohn tried to stop his going into the Army so he could stay on this committee and work with McCarthy. And there was, at one point, Roy Cohn was accused of blackmailing the Army, and it was a terrible, awful situation, and I went out and got a newspaper. And then I got another newspaper, and at that time in LA there were maybe 5 newspapers. And I began to see that my world was a lot bigger than I had any idea, and that it took more than reading one newspaper to try to understand what was going on, what the truth was. And that changed. That was an enormous change for me. And what I found out was disturbing enough to really change my loyalty to David, because he would never really discuss any of it with me. And
did he ever?
He tried to a couple of times, and then he would clam up. So ultimately, I decided not to marry him. We were supposed to elope to. He was in the service by then in Alaska.
And you knew?
No, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it.
And it was a very unusual time.
Yes,
in
and
the
I also
country.
left home shortly after that. Finally.
An eye-opening period for you.
Yeah.
About taking care of yourself better.
Right.
Now, at some point, as a result of this, you left Hollywood in the mid-1950s. How were you perceived by the acting community in New York when you went there?
Well, before I actually went to New York, I waited to get work that I could respect, and nothing was offered. It was just pretty much the same thing I'd been doing. And I did hear about a play that was being produced on Broadway, and I thought, and I read it, and I knew I'd be perfect for the role. And my agent said, you're a movie star, you don't audition. But I went to New York anyway and had an appointment to audition. And I met in the producer's office. Instead of going straight to the theater, they asked me to come to the office. And a gentleman came out and introduced himself to me. He said, he's the playwright. And he took me into the hallway so that we could be alone. And he said, I'm sorry, Miss Laurie, but we don't want you to read. We can't allow you to read because we can't afford to have a Piper Laurie and what she stands for in our play. And it took my breath away. And I didn't know what to say. But I took the plane back home and realized I'm going to have to change that, what Piper Laurie means.
Because Piper Laurie meant lesser, lighter material?
Yes, it meant somebody had been given this enormous publicity buildup. I was the girl who ate flowers.
What do you mean by that?
Oh, that was one of the stunts that they did after my first movie. There was a scene in Louisa where Ed McGuinn tosses flowers from the centerpiece into the salad he's mixing to impress the family. And the press agent on the set said, Piper, I have an idea. And he called all the newspapers and said to each of them he's giving them an original scoop that their new young contract player ate nothing but flowers. And so this was my life in those days. I would go to the commissary and have lunch with the press, a different one, and eat some sort of flower arrangement that had been arranged for me in the commissary. And I played it straight. I mean, it was more interesting, that role, than what they were giving me, in front of the camera.
You looked at it like an acting exercise.
Yes, exactly.
Was there, you mentioned an impression of what a Piper Laurie stands for.
Yes.
Was there also an impression of an actor who would end a contract? Was there any repercussions about that?
No, I don't think so. They just thought of me as a shallow, untalented person who'd had a lot of publicity.
And so the intention now was to get some credibility for your name, go to New York?
Before I left for New York, I kept hoping and doing everything I could to get a decent role. And I finally did read a script, a half-hour show for General Electric called, it was an original story called The Road That Led Afar. And it was beautiful, a beautiful story, beautifully written. And the producers and the director wouldn't let me in, wouldn't even see me. And after a time, I asked my agent, I begged him to make an appointment for me, and he did, just to meet with these people. And the reason they didn't want to meet with me because I was a glamorous bimbo.
To them.
And so I arrived for the appointment in blue jeans, and at that time, you had to get all dressed up with high heels and wear gloves and really look elegant and businesslike. So I wore blue jeans and an old shirt and let my hair be messy, and I came in saying, and no makeup, and said that I asked their forgiveness, but I had been riding my horse and I didn't have time to change. So, well, apparently it was just the right thing to do, because by the time I got home, there was a message saying that they were completely wrong about me and that they wanted me to play the part. And I did. And I was nominated. I got a nomination for an Emmy. It was my first one.
What did that feel like?
Yeah.
Did you understand the importance of the Emmy? Did that feel validating?
I never really was enamored with prizes. So it was the actual getting to play it and knowing that what we'd done was good was more important. And then a short time after that, I got it was actually 9 months after I'd left Universal. I got an offer to do a live television show. Nobody had been wanting to trust me to do live television. I mean, how can this girl do this? You know, she won't remember her lines. She has no experience. And the script was wonderful. It was a Robert Montgomery Presents. These shows got attention from, you know, everyone in the country watched them in those days. My part was very dramatic. And I couldn't understand how they had decided to offer this to me. But I said yes, you know, and I flew to New York and got a friend to let me stay with her in the village, and I felt I was a New York actress at last, which was my plan, had been my plan.
Did you wonder if you yourself could do it, live television?
Oh, I knew I could do it. I mean, I'd done theater when I was 11 years old. And I'd worked hard in acting class, and for my age, I was pretty experienced. And I showed up for the first day of rehearsal. I think we had 2 weeks of rehearsal for those hour-long live shows. And sitting across the table was my old friend from acting class who had directed me in the play I'd done that was my audition piece at Universal. And he was grinning at me, and he was there. He was going to be playing my boyfriend in the show. As it turned out, he was a good friend of the director and had said, you know, she's a good actress. She could do this. And that's how my life was changed through this dear old friend who stayed my friend for almost 50 years.
And what was his name?
Bob Richards. And I did the show scared to death.
Scared because it's live or because?
Because it was live. The idea that everyone in the country would be watching it, and it was highly emotional, and it demanded more than technique. And I worked well and hard, but my friend Bob would whisper in my ear during rehearsals, especially dress rehearsals, you know, save it. You're playing too fully. You'll have nothing left by the time we do this, the live show.
Is that good advice?
Well, it's good advice, but I didn't know how to do that. You know, I didn't know. In those days, it was all or nothing. You know, but I was young enough, and it meant I had the energy, and so that we did the show, and it was full, and I made a mistake. I had to take down this huge portrait of my mother in the last scene and throw it. And we couldn't rehearse it because they only had a budget for one portrait. So I'm strong. I knew I'd be okay. And I threw it, and I hit the camera that was shooting me. So it would shake. It was an extraordinary effect. And when the show was over, Robert Montgomery himself came over to me, and he said, well, Palmer, you're going to have to pay for that camera. And I was in such a state, and I thought he was serious. He was joking. But the next day, we all went out and had something to eat, and the next day I had an appointment to go up to my agent's office, the William Morris Agency. I'd never been up there because their hands were tied. They couldn't do anything for me anyway. And I went up there, and I met with the head of the office, and he said, I just came from lunch with Joe Mankiewicz, who saw your performance last night. He thought it was he raved about how wonderful it was. And I didn't believe him. And I just burst. Well, I did and I didn't. And I started to cry.
Joe Mankiewicz is the Academy Award winning
writer
and director.
Yes, the great extraordinary talented. Actually, they got Mankiewicz on the telephone to tell me the same thing because I really didn't believe it, and that's when I started to cry. And I don't like crying in front of people in real life. So
that was very significant.
yeah.
It meant that the tide had sort of come in or switched for your career
Yes,
anyway.
yes.
Now with live television, is there a dress rehearsal that afternoon? How does that work?
Well, the hour shows, yes, they were. I think there's a run through. I think there are probably 2 run-throughs and then the live show.
Do they allow for mishaps?
No.
They just
It's
happen
live.
if they happen.
You just keep going, no matter what.
And did anything other than the portrait, anything jump
I
out?
don't think so. Now, with the Playhouse 90s that were longer, hour-and-a-half shows, you had an extra week of rehearsal. And as I recall, I had the whole morning off and then would come back and we'd have a couple of run-throughs and then very short time between, and then you do the live performance. It was very good because they kept you so busy and working so hard that you didn't have time to get terribly scared.
Is it done in a studio, in front of an audience, with a
Oh
theater?
no, it's a studio, a sound stage, a huge one, and all of the rooms are separated. During the rehearsal period, those spaces are blocked off with tape on the floor, and then when you get to the time of the actual rehearsal, dress rehearsals, and the air, there are walls that move, and everything is worked out so specifically with timing is critical. And I would go hide behind a backdrop with my little props and have a 40-second change, and with a wig on this thing and my blouse here, and whatever I needed for my makeup, and do it in 30 seconds, change clothes and off. I did 3 different characters on a live show once.
As the countdown begins, is everybody terribly nervous backstage?
It's like, for me anyway, it was like, for the first show, I wished something would happen, a truck would run over me or something, The terror was so awful. But if you manage to stay there and get through it, it gets a little bit easier each time.
The biggest turns out to be Days of Wine and Roses, which you also get an Emmy nomination for. How did that come about?
Well, I had worked with John Frankenheimer on a previous Playhouse 90, which was one of my favorite shows, the Ninth Day. And we worked well together, and he had wanted me for Days of Wine and Roses, but I was doing a play on Broadway, rehearsing a play on Broadway, for Broadway. And he heard that I'd been fired, which was a big trauma in my life. And he immediately called the friend that was sort of taking care of me, Roddy McDowell, and asked if he could come see me. And he did. He brought me the script. And I really didn't want to do anything. I was mourning the loss of this beautiful role in a play I'd been working on for a year. And but I waited a day or so before reading it. Usually I'll read things right away. And I didn't know if I wanted to do it. I'd never played a drunk scene in acting class. I really didn't feel like working, but I thought, instinctively I knew that it was important to work to get me out of the depression that I was feeling.
Did you know this was an important piece too?
No, I didn't. I didn't think it was but I did think it would be a good exercise to try to play a drunk for the first time.
How did you prepare for that?
I went to the Bowery in New York and observed a lot. And I saw really beautiful things among people who were at the ends of their lives and were beautiful physical things with their bodies, that they do extraordinary things.
The way they walked?
Yeah, they walked, moved, and I thought it would be wonderful to be able to capture some of that in the work. And I just sort of stuck it there in the back of my brain. I went to AA meetings.
Did they know who you were?
No. No.
But you got to observe and listen.
Yeah.
And this is all part of the actor's technique, this kind of study?
Sometimes that kind of research really doesn't pay off, and it's not necessary, and it's a waste of time. But everything we did for that, I think, was useful to me anyway.
Did you speak to the writer?
Well, he came along to a lot of we got to slip into a side door at Bellevue one afternoon, very, very brief visit, and went through the ward there. And I just absorbed as much as I could. And then we had to go. But John Frankenheimer and J.P. Miller and I were together for all of those trips.
Does the actor take that kind of experience home with her?
Oh yes, I definitely took it home.
Too much?
Pardon?
Can it be too much?
No, I don't think so. Anymore, a person in life has to be able to acknowledge that there's a lot of pain out there for a lot of people.
What do you remember most about your performance in Days of Wine and Roses? We could stop here for tape if you want, and then we can come back.
I'd love to have a sip of water.